Since 2018, Chief has been brewing and playing mono white in Commander. While writing articles and serving as media lead for cEDH, he also helps manage the unified mono white cEDH Discord server. He is known for playing Heliod Suncrowned, and in particular, Lawful Evil, a deck featured on the cEDH database. His first-hand experience within the cEDH community means his info is on another level, and I've been lucky enough to get his time so we can review my version of Elesh Norn for cEDH. Thank you for joining me, Chief. What I really want to get into is Elesh Norn. So when this card was spoiled, there was a lot of hype about its usage within cEDH, whether it being a commander or how it can function within the 99 of a deck. And I kind of want to get your professional opinion about where you think this card is going to shine best within that space.
I think if you're playing a deck like Rocco, Cabaretti, Caterer, you can probably put this in the 99 of your deck. I'm going to be upfront and say that I don't think that I would play this commander as a cEDH commander, but I think that it's definitely a fun exercise to try and make it as good as possible for cEDH, which is what we're going to be doing today. Although I do think that this deck can do some interesting things.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I was kind of headed with it. Obviously, she's a very powerful stacks piece. Then my thought was using these flicker creatures to kind of abuse and take extra actions per turn and hopefully outvalue my opponents that way.
When you're on Rule of Law, you're going to want to find as many ways as possible to make your cards better than what everyone else is playing. So I guess doubling up on a powerful ETB ability or finding ways to get those ETBs on other people's turns is probably going to be one of the best ways to do it in a deck like this.
So we were kind of talking a little bit about Heliod. I'm curious, I didn't include that here in this deck. I didn't think it was like super appropriate. What do you think about that in this context?
I think that you're not going to actually want to play Heliod, Suncrowned, and Walking Ballista in the 99 of most commander decks. When it's not in the command zone, it's just not as easy to assemble it. Where like you can have a bunch of tutors that can find Walking Ballista, and you're running multiple cards in this deck that can find Walking Ballista, such as Ranger Captain of Eos, Recruiter of the Guard, and Enlightened Tutor. But you're not running as many cards that can find Heliod because there just aren't as many cards that are particularly good and efficient for cEDH that can find him.
With the Elesh Norn, being my commander, and I want to double up on ETBs, it didn't make any sense to add your Hushwing or your Torpor Orb type effects, which are traditionally very, very powerful stacks pieces with that mono white utilizes a lot of the times. Do you think that's a big trade-off for swapping to like anti-activated abilities, such as like Limvala or Cursed Totem?
The biggest difference between like Elesh Norn and like a Hushwing Grid, Hushbringer, Torpor Orb, Tocatli Honor Guard, Strict Proctor, any of those cards is they're all quite a bit less mana intensive to cast than Elesh Norn. So like if you're worried about like an early Dockside Extortionist or an early Thassa's Oracle, Elesh Norn is probably not going to stop those things.
No.
Which means that when you're trying to come up with a game plan, when you're looking at your opener, you need to think about what else can I do to make sure that that doesn't work. So there's definitely a trade-off. It also means that you don't ever turn off your own ETB abilities, where sometimes if you're playing the other mono white cEDH decks, maybe you're going to cast Hushbringer because you know that you need to cast it, and then maybe you'll draw Recruiter of the Guard sometime later, and it just won't be a creature that does anything at that time. That winds up being a trade-off that you have to make in that type of deck sometimes, where this deck doesn't make that trade-off, and there are advantages and disadvantages to it.
And speaking of Dockside, what do you think about like Stony Silence?
It's possible, but I think it just becomes eventually a question of, am I trying to do too many different things? You don't want to have to remove your own stacks piece consistently. Like, I'm not going to say that I've never destroyed my own Rule of Law so I can double spell and win the game.
Right.
I was playing Heliod because I've done it several times and people don't ever expect you to do it. On the other hand, you do run Blind Obedience, which does make Dockside Extortionist quite a bit worse than it normally is. People are always surprised when you cast it. The notable upside of stopping some other combos that really rely on a creature or artifact entering the battlefield untapped.
Yeah, I think this card is really great. And I was actually considering, I mean, kind of moving over to the win cons for a second. I was actually considering adding a white main lion since it can return itself in addition to another creature, potentially reset some ETBs. But also if we make infinite mana, we could use the white main lion with blind obedience to potentially extort the board. But I thought I was getting a little too cute with that.
It looks like the general intended win conditions are to come up with something using the Restoration Angel and Felidar Guardian, maybe to turn all your stuff into artifacts and blow it up with Lorana the Third Path, or
Mm-hmm.
Nadar can venture through the dungeon infinitely if you have infinite flickers. It looks like those would probably be the main ways that this deck wins. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so hear me out. It seems like it's going to be really mediocre sometimes, but then I've been consistently impressed by how much work Deep Gnome Terramancer actually does in cEDH games because people are so greedy. This deck with no mana rocks could probably always have 5 or 6 mana on turn 3 because your
Mm.
opponents will always play into it because they can't afford not to. I'll be happy to see it in my opener. One of those cards that you're happy to see if it's there, but you're never going to like mulligan to find Deep Gnome Terramancer. So since it looks like a lot of your combos require you to be able to cast a lot of stuff sooner, like I've been super impressed by that card.
Any other cards that you think I should consider?
I feel like there were probably ways to make Preston the Vanisher really, really good in this list because of how many ways he has to make things go infinite. Like he can go infinite with Felidar Guardian just by himself and let you get
True.
extra mana or flicker a card draw creature. And he also can make like extra value copies of things you flicker that just open up a lot of possibilities. Like if you're flickering a Recruiter of the Guard, you get another Recruiter of the Guard. But if you have your commander out and you flicker Recruiter of the Guard, then you'll get 3 Recruiter of the Guards and be able to tutor 6 things. Probably a lot. Like I don't know that you need that many, but I
Yeah.
definitely feel like there's a possibility that he can do something in this list.
What do you think about Abdel in a deck like this?
I think that there's probably a way to break Abdel in like every deck that he's in, just
Okay.
because of how crazy he is. Like I'm sure that it's probably pretty easy for you to just make something happen with Abdel just because of how he works.
Hmm.
I'm really not sure what they were thinking when they printed this card.
But I was having a hard time like figuring out what I would want to replace it with essentially. But I'm actually wondering if you think that Saracen has a place here.
I think unless you really want to turn sideways, or there's secondary benefit that make Sarah Ascendant isn't that important. I run Sarah Ascendant in Heliod because of the fact that it has lifelink and can
Right.
punch multiple totals. So
Right.
like that, I run Sarah Ascendant because it does both of those things. I'm also on Pyre of Heroes, and Sarah Ascendant can get pired into a Grand Abolisher, which is basically one of the best things that the deck can possibly do, which you're not able to do in this deck.
So the instance, pretty straightforward, but before we hit those, there are 0 sorceries. And this is a trend that I'm seeing in a lot of mono white decks is that it doesn't seem like there are any sorceries that are worth running within mono white and cEDH. Are there any?
As far as sorceries go, I
Hmm.
don't hate Savine's Reclamation. It's an amazing card. It's just
Okay.
when you're running so many pieces of graveyard hate, like I do, there's a really, really good chance that Savine's Reclamation doesn't do anything. Amiria's Call,
Okay.
because it's an MDFC and you can easily bring it onto the battlefield as an untapped land that makes white. I don't really think there are that many sorceries. Maybe Winds of Abandon, you could say, okay, this could be pretty good in specific circumstances.
What do you think about Soul Partition?
I think Soul Partition is better than people think it is. If you would run a bounce spell because it can copy your Dockside Extortionist, then you would consider that maybe this card is actually just better than another card that came out within the last year that you're also running in this deck that I think is like almost an auto include in mono white Pool of Law decks. is Touch the Spirit Realm. Because not only can you use it to remove something for a turn when it's causing a problem for you so that you can do your combo or anything else like that, it's not casting a spell, so it's super difficult to interact with, and it
Hmm.
works with Rule of Law really, really well. Super good card. I was on it day one in Heliod because it's just a card that you can't justify running, I think.
Right.
So those are all cards that are just really, really good.
Something that's really cool that Elesh Norn brings to the table, how she interacts with some powerful cards within mono white. Active Authority being another one that I think is really cool. I don't know if other mono white decks are running this card, but I think it's a really good card here, especially since if you do like the liquid metal coating thing, you can still exile everyone's artifacts because they don't come back when Active Authority leaves the battlefield, which is the craziest thing.
I'm a big fan of Active Authority. I've been looking for a deck that I could play it in. This pretty much looks like the ideal scenario where you would play it. Have you considered Grasp of Fate? Because Grasp of Fate is a 6-for-1 while you have your commander out.
So I didn't add Grasp because I was running out of room and I needed to make some cuts. And when I was comparing Grasp to Active Authority or Touch of the Spirit Realm, I didn't feel like it had as much utility. I do think it would be a reasonable swap. Like you could definitely add that back in. It was something that I was messing with. It just didn't end up on the final version.
So if you had to guess what card I would cut first if I was looking to add something else to this deck, what card do you think it would be?
Say Active Authority.
No, the answer is actually Thalia, Heretic Cathar. I
Oh yeah.
actually like
Okay.
this card a lot. I don't necessarily think that it's as good as some of the other cards in this deck. And it's definitely not as good as Thalia, Guardian of Thraben.
Fair enough. Because we already have the blind obedience, right? So
Yeah, you're already running Blind Obedience, and you're already running Archon of Emeria, which does the thing that's really more relevant.
yes.
Thalia just doesn't do as much else compared to those other two cards.
How important is it for mono white to have utility lands?
Say that it's more important for mono white to have utility lands than it is for any other color to play them, because mono white lacks meaningful card advantage outside of like one-offs, and
Mhm.
it also lacks a lot of other effects that other colors can easily get.
What do you think about like a Hall of Heliod's generosity in this deck?
If I was going to play this list, I would probably cut High Market and play Hall of Heliod's Generosity. I think that High Market really does anything for your list.
The Winding Canyons. This is a very interesting land that I've seen a lot of white decks and cEDH running.
I mean, if you're on Rule of Law and you can afford colorless lands, why wouldn't you run Winding Canyons if you have the ability to run it? There have definitely been games where I've had a Rule of Law out and somebody casts a spell and someone else casts a spell and the third player also casts a spell, and I had a Walking Ballista in my hand and I just cast Walking Ballista and killed it at flash speed. Like,
Right.
it definitely happens. It opens up a lot. An Emergent Zone is kind of similar.
I was messing around with a few cards in the sideboard. I know I already talked about White Mane Lion. Abdo, we talked a little bit about. I was considering Lion Sash, just an extra way to deal with graveyards, but I feel like the deck had enough options already in terms of dealing with that. And then the Weathered Wayfarer was another card I was considering.
Honestly, consider running it. I definitely always go back and forth on it in Heliod. I've played it. I've not played it. I have good lands in there like Mishra's Workshop, Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, and some other stuff that maybe is worth grabbing. So like I could see a case for that. Lion Sash is a card that I do run in Heliod. I like about Lion Sash, it's one of the only ways to go, okay, I'm going to exile this thing out of your graveyard. Well, I'm going to Noxious Revival it to the top of my library. Well, I'm going to exile it out of your graveyard again. There really aren't a lot of cards that let you do that. And maybe you're going, well, when would I ever want to do that? Well, you might want to do it if your opponent's playing the Gitron monster.
Thanks so much for joining me, Chief, and reviewing this Elesh Norn deck that I had built for cEDH, giving some tips and some pointers based on your expertise. Is there anything you want to shout out? Where can people find you?
You can find me at ChiefIsDef on Twitter. You can also find me on the cEDH Discord server. And you can find my articles on playedh.com. I write quite a few. Always happy to talk to people about mono white, cEDH, or otherwise. So don't hesitate to reach out if you want to talk to me about anything.
Thanks for watching, guys, and I'm Jacob with OpalWave MTG, and until next time.